I want to talk about the big thing that just dropped is that there are rumors Sony is working on a new dedicated handheld, not to be confused with the PlayStation Portal, a whole new proper thing. Bloomberg broke this story. I'm led to believe their website is paywalled, but we did cover it. It apparently isn't happening anytime soon. It is being described as a handheld console for PS5 games that would theoretically rival the Switch successor, what the other handheld things that are out there. So I want to just sort of think about this. Sony has a pretty decent track record for sort of doing its own thing when it comes to hardware, really not kind of buckling to trends per se. Maybe not quite as much as Nintendo really just does their own thing. But as far as chasing trends, they're frequently like, okay, but here's our added wrinkle. Here's the version we're doing. And I'm curious what you think this could bring to the table that hasn't been handled by the Switch, the Xbox handheld, which is, again, we don't know what it is exactly, but presumably it's going to be just an Xbox handheld, or the known quantity that is the Steam Deck and its various successors, like competitors, like the
Asus ROG Ally.
Asus ROGally. The ROGally, and then the Legion, the little handheld gaming PCs. What could this do? Jada, you had a really cool thought on this the other day
so I don't know, price wise or how this would affect it. Probably would jump the price up, but flip phones have been kind of coming back where the screens actually fold into each other. I think that could be a really cool thing for PlayStation if they teamed up with, I think, Samsung that has the flip phones for the screens. If they teamed up with them and did a foldable screen to where that could make this more practical for traveling with, as well as maybe, dare I say, small enough to fit in your pocket when folded up enough, where the controllers also kind of fold into itself. I don't know how that would work with analog sticks. There'd have to be some type of, I guess, indented recess where the analog sticks could rest. But, I'm not the technical designer here, Sony. You guys, you've done patents for controllers that melt and form and stuff like that. So I think you could figure this one out.
I like the concept on reducing the sort of screen real estate when it's in your pocket or whatever. But I think that one of the things that the Portal does well is that it retains all of the functionality and form factor of the DualSense. Right? You've got all those similar bells and whistles. So I wonder how much they would concede on that. Although if they were trying to make something that's holistic of the rest of their products, then they can do whatever. I think the issue here that I start thinking about is what is this going to be power wise? And will that power become a hindrance to their greater goal, which is to sell PS5s? You look at the Xbox Series S, right? I love that thing. It's adorable. Yeah. It's the kind of thing you can chuck in a backpack when you go to a hotel for the weekend, or put on, bring in an airplane and not really think about. Although occasionally they're like, what is this? And you're like, well, I don't know if Microsoft has figured that out yet either. But we know that developers have had a lot of trouble sort of scaling games to go to it. So making something that runs on, through Game Pass on PC and also runs on the Series X, which is beefy and strong, but then also has to function on a Series S, which is the size of 3, Blu-rays stacked up on each other. I wonder if they're thinking about that kind of stuff. If you look at Steam Deck, it's clunky and it's heavy, but it does its thing in terms of being able to mostly run everything in your Steam library, right? There's obviously some omissions there and some caveats, and there's some stuff you have to hold back a little bit. But for the most part, it just says, it does mostly what it says it's going to do, which is you can take your Steam library anywhere you go. Some of those games are not going to look great. They're not going to play great. The battery lives are going to be, miserable on that system. But ultimately, it's doing what it says it's going to do. So I do wonder what something like this is, because Sony is developing their own first-party games. If they would make something that scales to everything, or if they go, hey, we'll meet you in the middle, and when it doesn't run on that, then you can play it via remote play or cloud streaming it, right? So that's, you can put a little star next to the plays all your PS5 games.
I feel like at this point, with them adding the cloud streaming to the Portal, that's got to be a given. That's got to be their day one with the new handheld when this thing launches in 2, 3, maybe 4 years, like right at the tail end of the PS5.
What's interesting is them saying that this would be a PS5. Again, they didn't say anything. This is unconfirmed anonymous sources reported on by Bloomberg, but Xbox did acknowledge they're working on a handheld, so it stands to reason that Sony might be checking it. And again, it might be one of those things they're prototyping or playing around with that doesn't ever materialize, but it's still a really cool idea. Mm-hmm. What I'm wondering is that, Phil Spencer says that the Xbox's handheld is, years away, plural, which would put it pretty much at the tail end of this console generation. And one thing we saw a lot with the PS5 jump is how much stuff had to be backwards compatible and how much stuff was cross-gen, to the point that it was harder to, I imagine it kind of saw this generation get a slower start because it wasn't really, justifying buying new hardware for a next-gen exclusive if that stuff is still kind of just trickling in. However, if you were just suddenly like, hey, here's a new doodad that's coming out at the very tail end of the console generation, that's a new piece of hardware, it's effectively a new way to play, but you're playing games that have been out for the last generation. The one I always point to for this, which again is not necessarily a good thing to point to when you're talking about how to make a successful handheld, but the Sega Nomad came out basically at the tail end of the Sega Genesis life cycle, or lifespan, whatever. And at that point, they were like, "Hey, what if you had a Game Gear that could play all of your Sega games?" Mm-hmm. And it adds more life to that console generation by being like, "Oh, hey, like you're going to go out and you're going to buy games to play on the go that maybe you would have slept on." Keeping them on a console, or maybe you just, if you upgraded to a new console, that whole generation is left behind. But if Xbox is like, hey, the new Xbox handheld that plays everything on your Xbox Series on the go at, asterisk, lower resolution, maybe possibly requiring cloud streaming, that kind of thing. Sony came out and they're like, hey, just leading up to the PlayStation 6, or maybe just buying time until it comes out, being like, hey, you can take your entire PS5 and previous libraries on the go with this portable PS5 type device. That seems pretty awesome. Like that would get me pretty excited about, I would be less frustrated by, PS6 forthcoming. Like if they were like, you're not making games bigger, you're just making them more portable. Yeah, and that's kind of appealing to me. I think that's a cool thought.
And bring back the UMDs.
Please do not bring back the UMDs. We do not need the UMDs.
What about
just make them bigger to fit actual Blu-rays?
What about like some sort of storage that was like really hard to get and really expensive? Like maybe do that again.
Like a proprietary like kind of memory stick kind of thing. I guess I don't think they would do that. They wouldn't do that, right?
Max, you touched on something quickly there that I want to go back to. I think with the previous PlayStation handhelds, and we see this also with Steam Deck and Switch, one of the big things that happens is something called attach rate, which is how many games a user purchases based on a single system. So even if the system itself doesn't sell as much as, like, say, the Switch or the DS or something like that, the people who do buy it are buying 5 to 7 games, whereas they might not have done that otherwise. And with the PlayStation being like this sort of holistic library where you can, from generation to generation, keep your digital library going, that would be a really cool thing. Because it's like you're holding this, portable PS5 and you go, oh man, I really like playing games on this thing. I'm going to hop into the store, buy more games. You have those games on your account forever, theoretically. Right. Until, whatever happens in the all digital future. And so I think it's like, it's in their best interest as a software company to make a device that gets people to buy more PlayStation games, period. And wherever you're accessing those doesn't really matter, but I'm excited for it. I'm excited for the idea of like handhelds being like a viable competitive market again, where there's now multiple different, companies all around the world doing their own thing with them. Like we know that Switch 2 is a few months away from being officially announced or even sold on store shelves. And then Xbox said they're making their thing. PlayStation is now rumored to making a thing. We've got Steam Deck and all the other portable PCs, Analog Pocket, the Playdate with the little crank on it. Like there's a lot out there now. And it's, as somebody who grew up loving and really just always excited about handheld gaming, it's so cool to see that this is returned. And it did seem like it was going to die for a while there when the 3DS sales were kind of lackluster compared to the DS, and the Vita meant death. But like, I do think that there's another sort of life cycle that it's about to happen again. And I can't wait to see it happen because we're going to get a lot of really cool stuff from it.
Well, I think the key thing is that it wouldn't, I mean, again, we don't know what this thing is. It could very well be just another Vita, which would kind of be just another fumble. But the fact that it's not that we have more handheld gaming, it's that console gaming has become handheld.
Yeah.
And there's the idea of, like, I think the Switch 2 coming out, I think we heard, like, officially it's backwards compatible, which I think will convince a lot more people to buy it because suddenly it's like, oh, you can bring all that stuff with you. Like all that stuff you've spent, the last 8 years or whatever, piling up, you already have that with you. Like there's no, even if no games come out for it, which won't be the case, there's a little bit of reassurance that like, oh, I have a library for it. And that's definitely a selling point for the Steam Deck where they're like, hey, how many games do you have in your Steam library? I'm sure you haven't. Somebody ran the numbers where it's like there's the amount of money people have spent on Steam games they've never played. But like, suddenly getting
astronomical.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And like, I love the idea of, I don't know, being like, hey, I'm gonna play Bloodborne on a handheld like that. Like take some old game I've had kicking around for ages and just reinstalling it on a new device. The Vita, I love the Vita so much, but it was always, you always got the sort of that was still the age of handheld games being like a diet junior version of a console game, and Vita was pushing so close to the quality of what consoles were doing at the time, but it was still like not quite that. It was not quite there. And you had games like Tearaway that were specifically made, for this device that were taking full advantage of everything that it did. But then when that eventually got ported to consoles, they had to like get rid of a bunch of its features because, the regular PS4 controller doesn't have a camera on it, doesn't have touch pads on the back and the front. And, flip side, if it was like, hey, here's a game that you know and love dearly on your console, and we've shrunken it down and maybe added a few things or added, some features is kind of cool. Like I remember playing Uncharted Golden Abyss and being blown away at how good it looks, but it still being like forgiving it because it didn't look quite as good as what's on the TV with a regular Uncharted game.
Whatever year this comes out in, I'm hoping that, technology is far along enough where we're able to get, I would say, console quality handheld exclusives for this PlayStation, whatever it's going to be called. I think, because I'm trying to think what would entice me to want to buy this. Like, would it just be playing whatever game I could play on my PS6 on this handheld? Probably not. So I'm thinking like, because back in the day for like the PSP, they had handheld exclusive games for the PSP.
Yeah.
So
Same
I'm
with
kind of,
Vita.
So it'd be interesting to see if they bring like, and it could be some of their top IPs that they have that they just make like, they make exclusive games just for this particular handheld.
I mean,
kinda
they can't even make exclusives for the console. Like I think that's the problem here is that when Nintendo sort of they broke or disrupted or whatever is the idea of there being a separation between handheld and console. And they proved that people are willing to play a game that runs at 720p, 30 frames a second. But if it's a good game that, you can take it on the go or play it on your TV or whatever like that, if this is Sony and Microsoft going, maybe we don't need to focus on making the most powerful console out there and instead focus on making something that's just giving people a new way to play it, which ultimately is, I would say, more important than full on, pushing the envelope of what is graphically possible. Akeem, I do like the idea of there being like exclusive features on a handheld version. I think one big issue that we would see if this were to play like PlayStation 5 games just on the go is that so many of those are made to be played on a big screen. So you can read lots of small text. And suddenly if you shrink that screen down, you run into some UI problems, you run into some accessibility problems. And, is that a patch? Is that a separate version of the game? It's, kind of question marks there.
No,
it all depends on how the game was developed in the, without going in the shallowest of explanation. Depends on that. You would hope it would be developed in a way to where it could be patched. But, everything should scale down. But like you said, scaling it down does make the text smaller as well, to a degree. So,
yeah. I think that's what's interesting this time around, because it's like Nintendo went into this generation or whatever generation they're in currently with the idea that like they were going to combine their two pillars into one, right? They always had a unique handheld and console line, and they just kind of jammed them together after failing at that or having a very sort of rudimentary approach at that with the Wii U, which was it's portable. If you walk 8 feet away, it stops working. And so like they built all of their games from the ground up to work on a TV and a handheld. And that the same sort of like, design philosophy has not gone into the last decade or so of PlayStation games, although now you can stream them and remote play them on the Portal, which we know has sold well enough. They've said like things like it's a hit, it's successful and stuff like that. But to Akeem's point, like I think you're totally right in that a lot of people would want something unique on this thing to entice them to buy something other than just like, here's a smaller version of a game you've played already, right? What that entails exactly is, I don't know if I see them getting Sony Bend to spin up a brand new exclusive Uncharted or anything like that. But I do think that there is like, there's something to be said for giving people a reason to buy something like this over just it plays everything you have already,
right,
which to be fair is a pretty good, it's a pretty big flex to be able to say that. But I think a lot of people would want something else.
Yeah. And
no, I agree. I think people do. And I think that's even us because rewind time to like a month and a half ago with the PS5 Pro. And we're like, where's our exclusive things for this? We can play all these things the same way, but better. Like, that's kind of the same thing. Like, we want those exclusive experiences to sell us on that console. That's why, many of us and lots of people out there are waiting still on a PS5 Pro. And I think they run the risk of running into that same situation with a PlayStation handheld if they don't have some type of killer app or thing to go along with it as well.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that got a PSP because of Vice City Stories, because they're just huge fans of Rockstar games and, of course, Vice City and just the Grand Theft Auto franchise. And that was originally released for the PSP, like exclusively released for the PSP. So it's I would love for them to bring something like that back again. Like I said earlier, like hopefully like technology has advanced enough where it's like even companies like, third party companies like Rockstar buy into it, where it's like, we're going to take this franchise and we're going to make a game exclusively for this handheld.
I'm curious, what is the first place people are going to be able to play GTA 6 portably? Because the PC version is going to come a cool minute after the console version. We don't know when Xbox is putting out a handheld. We don't know if Sony's putting out a handheld. We don't know if we're going to see, I doubt this will happen, but GTA 6 on the Switch too? Probably not for a minute, but you never know. I mean, we got plenty of time to talk about it.
Day one, right?
I mean, I guess, but how portable is that? You got strong enough phone service you can tether to it or whatever?
As 2024 comes to a close, there is one question on everyone's mind. What is the game of the year? At IGN, we take this award very seriously. And this year, you're invited to join in on the debate. The payoff to our Game of the Year watch begins on the week of December 16th with our podcast, Nintendo Voice Chat.
Hey, what's up, Super Nintendos?
Beyond.
I can see you wielding a Buster Sword.
And Unlocked.
What'd you think after playing it?
Where we'll deliberate and bicker about each console's Game of the Year. It all culminates with the reveal of the big winner on December 20th on our special episode of Game Scoop.
It's been a great year for games already so far. Lots of great games.
Log on and join us in celebrating this year's Best in Gaming. Only on IGN.